Most subcontractors don't stay subs because they want to. They stay there because they're not set up to be the prime. And if you try to jump too early without the structure, you don't just lose the contract, you lose your business. So, in this video, I'm breaking down what actually has to change if you want to move from subcontractor to prime contractor and win. If you're already doing six figures or even maybe multiple six figures, and you worked up under a prime before, this is for you. This is not about getting registered or finding your first contract. This is about building the infrastructure to lead the contract. What do you think the first problem is? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm getting ready to share it with you. Most subs think that the next step is just winning as a prime. Wrong. The real question is, can your business handle one? As a subcontractor, you're responsible for your scope. As a prime, you're responsible for everything. And that means managing multiple subcontractors. And in order to do that, you need to have a system in place and the necessary paperwork to track your subs' work. You're also going to have to be able to handle timelines across the trades. So you're going to need a system in place to track the whole project schedule. And you'll be dealing directly with the agency. So you'll be involved and a part of the kickoff meetings where you'll talk about the project as a whole. You'll talk about timelines, the schedules, milestones you want to hit. And, definitely you'll even narrow down the conversation and talk about maybe like the first 30 to 90 days. What does that look like? You also hold monthly progress meetings with the agency or whoever the prime is. So you'll have those monthly meetings where you guys will talk about progress, any risk factors you see popping up over the next, 30, 60, 90 days. And if you see further than that, of course, you would share that. You'll also talk about, the upcoming payments, any change orders you foresee coming, or change orders maybe you've submitted weren't approved or they're on hold. So, that monthly meeting is a time for you guys to discuss the project as a whole, but definitely talking about payments, talking about the project timeline and schedule. Now, in addition to meeting with the agencies on a consistent basis, usually monthly, anytime any issues arise, then of course you would communicate that immediately to all the key factors or people involved that need to know about that so that you can mitigate the risk as much as possible with those change orders, as well as keeping the project flowing. Because if something comes up and a change order is required, I don't suggest you working and completing the work that you have within the change order without it being approved first. Because if it's not approved, they don't have to pay you for it. So you want to make sure before you start implementing on those change orders that you have the proper approvals in place. Also, as the prime, you're going to carry the financial risk. What does that look like? I'm glad you asked. We're talking about bonding if the project requires bonding, and we know a lot of the large construction projects will require bonding. So that's a risk factor that you'll have to cover. And then also floating the entire project until the payments start coming in. That's why it's important to know your capacity as well as the cash that you have on hand and what your cash flow looks like. You're also responsible for paying your subcontractors, any vendors that you have, materials that you're purchasing, suppliers, any equipment you have to rent. Those payments still have to be made whether you receive that first payment or not. So you want to make sure you have the runway to be able to handle those things until the payments kick in. And then let me just tell you, if your current operations rely on you to be involved in everything, you're not ready yet. It is no way possible on $1 million contract that you can have your hands in everything without slowing down the process. So you're going to need a project management structure. You need clear roles within your team. Who handles what part? Who handles the back office? Who handles the front office? That really needs to be clear. Who's tracking, the money flow? Who's tracking your subcontractors? Who's tracking invoices coming in? Who's tracking invoices going out? Everything needs to be tracked. Who's tracking change orders? If it's a huge project where you're dealing with a lot of change orders, you may have someone that just handles change orders. And another key role that you may want to think about, and maybe we'll talk about this later, is having a project coordinator. They could handle a lot of the paperwork in the back office, and your project manager and your superintendent could handle the front office, the field work. And then you also want to make sure you have the systems in place to track your performance and your timelines. They will come in handy later. Now, if you don't fix capacity first, becoming a prime will expose every weakness in your business. Now, check out my GovCon readiness checklist if you haven't already to see what gaps you may have as you're making the move from subcontractor to prime contractor. I'll put the link down below for that free resource. Check it out. Identify what gaps you have, and you'll kind of know where you should start focusing as you make the move to being a prime contractor. Now, as you're making the move to prime, you may have a solid background with experience. But if all of your experience is tied to being a subcontractor, that's a problem. Agencies don't just look at what you've done, they look at what you've led. So you need to start repositioning your experience. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. And you can do this even while being a subcontractor. Here's the first thing I want you to do. Highlight where you've managed crews. If you've had others working with you, even as a subcontractor, maybe a short-term worker, it doesn't matter. If they were working under you and you were managing them, then you can show where you've led a project. So you should start tracking that. How many subs were you working with? How many people were working under you, right? How large was the project? Start tracking that information so that you can show that you've led projects. The next thing you want to start tracking is where you've controlled timelines. Even though you're not doing the whole entire project right now and you're just a sub, working within your scope, well, you still have to manage the timeline within the scope of work that you're going to perform. So also start tracking that. And then here's another this one is really important. Start documenting where you have impacted the project, where you have impacted the project outcomes. And I'm sure you've done this. And the easiest way to start tracking your outcomes is start to tracking the work that you're doing on projects. And then also tracking any issues that come up, any, change orders you foreseen, things coming up down the road. Maybe it wasn't caught in the initial bid process or something like that, or in the initial plans. Make sure you're making note of those things, that you're also tracking, or you've had an impact in how the project outcome was delivered. So definitely make sure you're tracking that as well. And here's the part most people skip. You should be strategically choosing subcontracts that position you for prime work later. Not every job is worth taking if it does not build your profile. So remember that. Now, your financial structure, it has to change. And this is where most fall apart as they make the transition financially. Because as a prime, you're focusing on payroll, materials, subs, and delays in payment. If your cash flow is tight right now as a subcontractor, becoming a prime will only make it worse. You need access to capital or lines of credit. So you want to make sure you're ready to float the project anytime you deal with payment delays, or maybe you were paid incorrectly, the wrong amount. Maybe you didn't submit all of the backup for the payment that you should have, and so they only paid you for what you submitted. It could be a multitude of reasons, but nevertheless, you want to make sure you're positioned to float the project if those issues come up. You want to make sure you have a strong billing and invoicing system. And if you don't have one, please get one. This is so important. When will you invoice your customer? When will you pay out to your subcontractors? You need to know these things beforehand so that you can put a system in place to make sure they happen and make sure the cash flow keeps flowing. And at the end of the day, having timelines in place for your billing and your cash flow coming in and out the business, trust me, it will cut down on the stress. Now, you want to protect your cash flow? Make sure you have subcontractor agreements in place. Now, I said agreements, so I mean in writing. Okay, verbal, that's fine, but back it up in writing, because your subcontractor agreements will protect your margins. And if you don't have a subcontractor agreement in place, that is one of the first things we work on inside the Prime Ready Accelerator. And if your financial structure is not solid, you'll win the contract, but then you're going to struggle at delivering. I'm curious, what's your biggest concern with becoming a prime? Cash flow, managing subs, or compliance? Let me know down in the comments. Now, as we said, when you're the prime, everything falls on you. That includes contract compliance. That's monitoring the manufacturers that you use, work hours, how you're paying, what is the pay rate you're paying your people, number of workers that you are required to have on site. And those are just a few of the things that you will have to manage, but also make sure you're looking at your compliance requirements, that you're hitting those things that they're requiring you to do as you perform the project. You're also going to have some safety requirements, and a lot of your safety requirements, you can go to OSHA for that. So, you could always hire a OSHA certified person to work with you on the project, or you may have someone internally in your company that's OSHA certified as well, and that works too. But you want to make sure you have a safety plan in place. And then you're going to be required to have insurance coverage, right? Your general liability, workers' comp. You want to make sure that you have the limits that are required. And of course, they're going to ask for proof. You also want to make sure your subcontractors are compliant in what they're performing, right? So if you're required to meet XYZ, you're going to roll that down to your subcontractors. And if you're not, you should be doing that. So your subcontractors are going to have a timeline to start the project and when they should finish, right? Based on their trade and, what the schedule looks like for them. How many workers they need to have on site, what are their insurance requirements, right? So whatever your insurance requirements for their scope of work, you'll roll it down to them. And then you may have bonding required for them as well, just depending on how big their scope is, right? So if you're required to have bonding, for example, to do all of the electrical work, and let's say it's over a certain dollar amount, then you may have them bond back their portion of the work. And that's a great way to mitigate some of your risk. But just keep in mind, if something goes wrong, the agency is not going to your subs. They are coming to you. So you're going to need strong contracts in place, compliance systems, and a documentation process. You can't keep it all in your head. The projects are going to be too big for that. And what we just covered here, this is the difference between companies that scale and companies that get stuck cleaning up problems. Now, if you want more on the systems with the steps you need to have in place, watch last week's video on Are You Prime Ready? And I'll put the link in the description as well. You need a strategy, not just a goal, because becoming a prime, that's not a goal, but it's a strategy. In order to make the transition from subcontractor to prime contractor, you should already know what contract types you're targeting. Like, what type of work are you looking for? What areas are you looking to focus on? Do you just want to do local work, within your state, within your region, or are you open to all over the United States? What agencies are you going to focus on? Because there's a lot of agencies, and let me just say, as a small company, it's hard to do your due diligence and try to focus on all agencies. And then all agencies aren't buying what you're selling anyway. So you want to focus on, like, what do they have coming down the pipeline over the next year or the next 3 years, right, as far as projects, and that will help you in determining which agencies you should be focusing on. And And then that you can narrow down into what sector of the market you want to focus on. Do you want to do federal work, state, like state government, your local government, city, county? Or are you looking to do corporate work? Or maybe you want to stay in the private sector, but you want to move to the prime position. So you decide, agencies or companies. And then what size projects meet your current capacity? This is why knowing your capacity is a must. Like, it's so many reasons you always need to know your capacity. Then you have to look at what gaps do you need to fill before you start bidding. Unfortunately, you can't see the picture when you're the frame. What do I mean? A lot of times you cannot see your own gaps. In most cases, neither can I. Most people can't see their own gaps. You may see some things, but like when you're stuck and you just can't seem to figure it out, that's because you're the picture in the frame and you need someone else to help you see those gaps. Now, if you don't have these things mapped out, you're guessing. And guessing is very expensive in this space, really in any space. Now, are you serious about transitioning from a subcontractor to a prime contractor? If you are, you need more than motivation. You need structure behind your business. And that is exactly what I help construction companies build. So if you're already doing at least $150,000 in your business a year and you're ready to step into the prime position without putting your business at risk, check out the link below and apply to work with me. Because the goal isn't just to win bigger contracts. It's to build a business that can actually handle them. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.